James Smith, at 40 years old, was a dichotomy wrapped in expensive cashmere and a thick layer of solitude. He carried the title of fire captain, a profession that demanded bravery, community, and heart. Yet his true wealth came from a sprawling real estate development empire inherited from his grandfather. It was this dual nature a hero on the clock. A cynical recluse off at that had earned him the unofficial moniker among his staff, the Solid Ice Chief. The source of his cynicism wasn't a business failure, but a more profound corrosive wound. Hayes' former fiancée, a woman he had trusted implicitly, had orchestrated a public, humiliating betrayal centered entirely on his assets, not his affections. The event, occurring nearly a decade ago, had calcified his heart, convincing him that genuine human motive was a myth, replaced entirely by greed and calculation. His expansive, minimalist penthouse on the 30th floor, overlooking the unforgiving Chicago skyline, mirrored this emotional landscape. It was flawlessly maintained, stunningly designed, and profoundly cold, utterly devoid of the warmth one associates with a home. Every piece of furniture, every polished marble surface, felt like a boundary. He kept a high staff rotation, a fact known throughout the agency he used for domestic services. Most new hires lasted less than a week, wilting under the oppressive silence and James's emotionless, exacting scrutiny. He would simply sign the termination paperwork, confirming his deepest belief that people were disposable and motivated only by... It was a drizzly Tuesday morning when his assistant, John Johnson, presented the file for the newest candidate. James barely glanced up from a zoning report. He expected another vapid smile, another set of rehearsed answers. The name on the file was Mary Smith. She was 35, a single mother, and her experience was in specialized cleaning and elderly care, a far cry from managing a luxury residence. When the doorbell chimed precisely at 9:02 a.m., James was standing by the oversized window, his back to the door, a deliberate act of intimidation he had perfected. "Mr. Smith," a voice said, soft but unexpectedly firm. "I'm Mary Smith. I'm here for the position." James turned, raising one eyebrow, a gesture that usually made interviewees stutter or apologize for existing. Mary was slight, but her posture was straight, her plain, neat clothes suggesting resourcefulness rather than wealth. Her eyes, a striking hazel, met his with a directness he hadn't encountered in years. "The position," James repeated, his voice a low, gravelly monotone, "is demanding. The pay is generous. The tolerance for error is zero." Mary offered a small, knowing smile. "I've seen the online comments, sir. Some call it the best paid torture session in the city. They say surviving 3 weeks here is harder than a marathon. But I thrive on hard work, and I need this job to build a life for my daughter." Jamise paused. Her honesty was disarming, her frank acknowledgement of the Job's reputation completely unprecedented. He had anticipated flattery. He received truth. He briefly reviewed her file, minimal education, but stellar references regarding her diligence and empathy in caregiving roles. "Empathy doesn't polish steel," he countered, his gaze unwavering. "No, sir, but a calm mind and a steady hand do. And I have a special talent for managing stress my own and, apparently, that of highly stressed employers," she replied, a faint spark of humor touching her lips. For the first time, James felt a flicker of something other than disdain, perhaps a grudging curiosity. She wasn't just not intimidated, she seemed to be challenging his narrative. "I'll give you 3 weeks, he conceded, citing a time frame intentionally different from the standard 1-week trial. "Don't start planning your retirement party yet. Most don't make it past the 7th day." Mary simply extended a hand. "Perfect. I've always enjoyed beating the odds." Her handshake was warm, unexpectedly strong, and entirely human, a stark contrast to the cold, distant professional grips he was accustomed to. As she left to begin her duties, James felt a familiar instinct kick in. He needed to test her, to confirm his deep-seated prejudice that her warmth, like everyone else's, was a facade concealing a simple monetary motive. That same afternoon, James meticulously prepared his test. In his secluded, soundproof study, he accessed a hidden compartment and pulled out a stack of $50,000 in crisp hundreds, a contingency fund he kept off the books. He scattered some bills carelessly on the polished mahogany floor and placed the rest partially visible inside a large, unlocked, antique sailor's chest near his desk. He then took a mild sedative, enough to make his breathing shallow and his body limp, but not enough to render him truly unconscious, feigning a sudden stress-induced collapse onto the oriental rug near the chest. He wanted the scenario to look accidental, a moment of vulnerability caused by his demanding work schedule. He lay there, his eyes barely slits, his heart thumping, waiting. A few minutes later, Mary knocked lightly. "Mr. Smith, I'm just here to dust and reorganize the literature shelves." James managed a low, convincing groan. "Come in," he mumbled, slurring his words to simulate a dizzy, weakened state. Mary entered with her cleaning supplies, humming a quiet, almost melancholic tune. She moved methodically, seemingly absorbed in her work, until she knelt to collect a fallen rag, and her eye caught the scattered money. Her humming stopped instantly. James held his breath, the tension a tight knot in his chest. Here it comes, he thought, the moment of truth. To his astonishment, her first instinct was not the money. She rushed to his side, her expression shifting from surprise to immediate professional concern. She checked his pulse, his breathing, and gently called his name. Finding him stable but unresponsive, she quickly retrieved a thick, clean blanket from a nearby closet and covered him. Then she noticed a stack of bills near the chest. James watched, heart pounding, as she slowly reached for the money. She didn't pocket it. Instead, she carefully gathered every last bill, smoothing out the wrinkles. But what followed was entirely outside of his cold expectations. Instead of simply placing the money back in the chest or on the desk, she found a small, leather-bound book on one of the shelves. She placed the money inside the book, marking the page. Then, she retrieved a single heavy stone coaster from his desk, a gift from his late father, and placed it firmly atop the sailor's chest, right where the money had been visible. She placed a small, simple, sticky note on the stone coaster, not addressing the money, but his condition, rest. The world's problems will wait. You need a solid foundation to manage this weight. The note made no reference to the money, no mention of retrieving it, merely a quiet insistence on stability and rest, applying a metaphorical weight to the location of his physical and financial collapse. James nearly broke his cover, a strange mixture of confusion and an unfamiliar warmth replacing his icy sip. She finished her cleaning, adjusted the blanket, and left as quietly as she came, the sound of her faint humming receding down the hallway. James lay there for several minutes after she was gone, staring at the ceiling, the cold, hard stone on the antique chest. Covering the book where $50,000 lay untouched felt like a silent, profound indictment of his entire worldview. He sat up slowly, carefully removing the coaster and retrieving the money. The small, handwritten note, with its emphasis on solid foundation, he crumpled and then immediately smoothed out again, tucking it into the inner pocket of his blazer. The next day, James woke up with a feeling he hadn't experienced in years: anticipation. He found Mary not only punctual but already at work, her presence a quiet, industrious hum against the silence of the house. He watched her discreetly. He saw her gently mist the leaves of his oversized, neglected fiddly fig tree, talking to it as if it were a colleague. "You look a little sad today, old boy. We need more sunlight and a little less silence in here." She repositioned a sun-blocking curtain to allow a different, softer kind of light into the vast living space. When he approached her later in the kitchen, she was arranging a bowl of brightly colored citrus fruits on the stark, black countertop. "You were here before your scheduled time," he observed, his voice still low, but lacking its usual cutting edge. "That's not billable." Mary didn't flinch. "I'm just opening the house up, Captain. The house has good bones, but it needs a little help remembering it's a home. And these," she gestured to the lemons and tangerines, the color of sunshine in the gloom. "They're a mood lift, a bit of scientific happiness." James, the pragmatist, narrowed his eyes. "My happiness is calculated in quarterly profits. Ms. Smith, not citrus." Mary smiled, genuinely. "Not professionally." "Then I suppose we'll have to adjust the equation, won't we?" Sometimes, the simplest variables hold the greatest value. Her ability to turn his own rigid logic against him, always gently and without disrespect, was unsettling. She was applying a personal, human calculus to his perfectly engineered life, and against his will, the numbers were starting to shift. James spent the rest of the day in a state of simmering internal conflict. He wanted to dismiss her to end the experiment before it yielded a result he couldn't control. Yet, he was captivated by the sheer force of her quiet, positive presence. He found himself wandering the halls, unconsciously seeking the faint echo of her humming, the quiet, rhythmic sounds of her working that felt like a pulse returning to a frozen body. He found her gently scrubbing a wooden cabinet, her hips swaying slightly to the rhythm, a sound that, combined with the aroma of freshly baked bread, felt alien and wonderfully invasive in his mausoleum of a home. She noticed him and immediately lowered the volume. "Apologies, sir. My spirit gets restless when it has too much silence." "Don't," he interrupted, surprising himself. "Leave it." He stayed for a minute, simply watching, before retreating to his office. He tried to focus on his reports, but his mind kept looping back to the small, crumpled note in his pocket and the untouched $50,000. He realized he hadn't planned to fire her after the test he had planned for her to fail, to confirm his own bitterness. Her refusal to take the bait, her choice to offer kindness and simple advice instead, had disrupted the entire equation. The game wasn't about money. It was about trust. And for the first time in 10 years, he felt a hairline fracture in the solid ice he had built around his heart. The 3-week trial felt too short, the outcome already uncertain. The next 10 days in the penthouse were a peculiar blend of James's rigid schedule and Mary's pervasive, gentle subversion. She didn't challenge his authority, but she challenged the atmosphere. He started noticing small things. The way the light now hit his leather armchair, the surprising scent of vanilla and clean linen that had replaced the stereo, ozone smell of his expensive air filtration system, and the unexpected presence of a tiny, cheerful potted succulent placed near his laptop accompanied by a note. A reminder that small things can survive the toughest conditions. Like you, James didn't throw the plan away, but he did stare at it for a full 5 minutes before returning to his spreadsheets, a slight, almost imperceptible softening around his jawline. He found himself walking through the house, unconsciously seeking the faint echo of her humming, the quiet, rhythmic sounds of her working that felt like a pulse returning to a frozen body. The true turning point, however, centered on a specific object hidden away in a seldom-used utility closet near his personal gym. The grandfather-esque brass bell. This heavy, tarnished bell had hung for 60 years in the main hall of the fire station where James's father and grandfather had both served as chiefs. It was the bell rung 2 Cygnus shift changes and, most tragically, to mark the loss of a comrade. It hadn't been rung in over 15 years. Ever since a catastrophic fire had claimed the lives of 3 of James's closest colleagues at an event, James himself survived, but the psychological toll of which had been immense. The bell was rescued from the rubble and placed in the closet, a painful relic of duty and despair. One afternoon, James, returning from a grueling shift, found Mary kneeling by the closet, not cleaning, but simply gazing at the dull, corroded brass. "It's beautiful," she murmured, not realizing he was there, her finger tracing the faded, etched names on its surface. "It has such a long story, but it's completely silent." James's voice was sharp, cutting through the silence. "It's ruined. It carries too much weight to ever ring true again. Leave it alone, Miss Smith." He rarely showed overt emotion, but his tone held a deep, buried anger. Mary stood slowly, facing him calmly. "Captain, I apologize, but sometimes when an object is heavy with grief, we mistakenly think it's broken. Usually, it's just the accumulation of dirt and neglect that stops the sound." The next day, Mary didn't clean the windows or polish the floors. Instead, she commandeered a small workspace in the garage. James, alerted by the scent of polish and industrial cleaner, found her hours later meticulously working on the bell. She wasn't just polishing, she was gently manipulating the small, nearly seized interior mechanism, applying a specialized oil and using tiny tools from a kit she clearly owned. When he stood watching, arms crossed, she explained without looking up, "This isn't about making it shine, sir. It's about releasing the friction. The metal remembers how to work. It just needs a little assistance getting over its own resistance." James simply watched, unable to speak, the fear of that resonant sound mixing with a strange, burgeoning hope. Finally, she finished. She didn't ring it. She just placed the heavy bell gently on a thick workbench and stepped back, wiping her hands. "It's ready now, Captain. But only you can ring it. It's your history." He stood there for a long time after she had gone, staring at the gleaming brass, the etched names suddenly clear and bright, not just marks of loss, but of honor. Later that evening, alone in the house, James walked back to the bell, his hand shaking. He gripped the wooden handle of the clapper, took a deep breath, and pulled. The sound that erupted was not loud or aggressive, but deep, rich, and vibrating with a solemn, powerful clarity. Gong. The reverberation filled the vast, cold space, chasing away the ghosts of silence. It was a sound of remembrance, not ruin. James stood weeping silently, the emotion entirely unexpected, entirely consuming. Mary hadn't just cleaned an object. She had forced his past to speak again, and in doing so, had freed a piece of his frozen heart. As the second week began, the changes were noticeable, even outside the house. James's colleagues at the fire station and his executives at Smith Development started whispering, "Did you see the chief?" One analyst muttered. He actually laughed in the quarterly review meeting. A real laugh. Another remarked on the small, framed photo that had appeared on his desk, a faded picture of his grandfather beside the brass bell, now clean and clear. The general consensus was that this change had a cause. Mary Smith. The resentment began to brew, fueled by jealousy and the fear that this Frail woman was gaining inappropriate influence over the Solid Ice chief. The tension came to a head when Robert Williams, a senior director in James's real estate firm, requested a private meeting. Robert was a man who prized image and perceived stability above all else. James Robert began avoiding eye contact. Some of us, the senior partners, are concerned about optics. This woman, this housekeeper, the level of comfort you seem to display, it's unconventional. The rumors are circulating in the financial district. It's detrimental to your image as a focused, disciplined leader. He pushed a newspaper clipping across the desk. A subtle photo of Mary laughing as she held James's coffee cup, taken outside the building by a long lens. It suggests a lack of boundaries. Frankly, it's not appropriate, Captain. You risk your reputation over a domestic employee. James leaned back, his gaze as cold and steady as the North Star, the ice momentarily reforming to defend the one person who was melting it. "Robert," he said, his voice dangerously soft, "who exactly determines what is appropriate in my personal life? I know Mary Smith better than I know most of the people who sit on your board. She is honest, diligent, and possesses more integrity than many of the associates who spend their days worrying about my image and your profits. If anyone in this firm mentions her name again with disrespect or implies that her presence is anything other than a professional asset." James Smith, the fire chief, hoje 40, likely wearing a vibrant, red, expensive cashmere blazer over professional attire. A typical light-skinned Caucasian man with short, authoritative, possibly dark hair, reflecting his status as a wealthy fire captain. Mary Smith, the housekeeper, age 35, wearing vibrant colored, plain, neat, and resourceful clothing, a slight woman with striking hazel eyes and hair. Lily the daughter, age 8, wearing typical child's clothes, vibrant colored, characterized by small size, bright hazel eyes, and a face often streaked with dirt from play. I will be preparing their resignation, effective immediately. Are we clear on the priorities, Robert? The director swallowed hard, nodding rapidly, utterly intimidated. James's defense of Mary was absolute, his loyalty shocking to those accustomed to his customary indifference. Mary, who was delivering a package and overheard the exchange from the hall, pressed a hand to her chest, tears blurring her vision. She left the package and retreated quietly, a profound, unfamiliar warmth spreading through her. Someone with power had just fought for her honor. Later that afternoon, Mary, still reeling from James's defense, was organizing his large library. She found a leather-bound journal his father's open to a page filled with sketches. She also noticed a peculiar object tucked into the corner, a beautiful but slightly damaged ceramic compass, the needle broken, resting on its side. It was clearly old and cherished. She looked at it, then James's stern, handsome face, and the vast, beautiful, but directionless space of the house. That evening, Mary approached him cautiously. "Captain, I found this compass. It's exquisite, but it's broken." "Did you know?" James barely glanced up from his blueprints. "Yes. My father used to say it pointed true north." "It broke Years ago. I kept it because it's not repairable. Mary placed the compass on his desk. Everything is repairable, Captain. Maybe not to its original state, but certainly to a new, beautiful one. It just needs a new point of focus, a new anchor. He looked at her, truly looked, seeing the gentle determination in her hazel eyes. You speak a lot about repair, Miss Smith, but some damage is fundamental, irreversible. Mary simply held his gaze, a slight tremor in her voice. Perhaps, Captain, but I believe you don't throw away the ship just because the compass is broken. You teach yourself a new way to navigate. Her words resonated with the sound of the newly rung brass bell. She was the one teaching him to navigate the terrain of his own heart. The silent pact between them, her quiet work fixing his emotional architecture. His unwavering defense of her reputation deepened their bond far beyond employer and employee. He was beginning to see her not as a service provider, but as a lifeline, a person who saw the fractured elements of his life and chose to heal them rather than exploit them. It was a new, terrifying, and exhilarating direction for the Solid Ice Chief. He realized the most vulnerable part of him wasn't his wallet or his reputation, but the fragile hope that someone, somewhere, was truly good. The emotional deepening culminated with the arrival of Mary's daughter, Lily, an 8-year-old whirlwind of boundless curiosity and startling honesty. Mary, in a moment of desperate childcare conflict, had to bring Lily to the penthouse for a few hours. The tension was palpable. James despised interruption, and the presence of a child was a direct assault on the sterile quiet he valued. Lily, however, was undaunted. She moved through the vast space, not with timidity, but with the quiet wonder of a small explorer. She stopped in front of James, who was trying to read a blueprint. Her small face tilted up at his. "Mr. Smith?" she asked, her voice clear and without guile. "Your house is very big, but why doesn't it have any color? Don't you feel lonely in all this white silence?" The question, simple and devastating, struck James harder than any corporate review. He looked down at the child, seeing in her hazel eyes the same penetrating honesty her mother possessed. "Loneliness," he managed, his voice stiff, "is sometimes the price of success. Lily, it's peaceful." Lily shook her head seriously. "My mom says peace is only real if you can share it. Otherwise, it's just empty waiting." James was silenced, once again confronted by a wisdom that utterly defied his accumulated wealth and experience. The calm shattered later that afternoon in James's private memorabilia room, a space dedicated to his family's long history with the fire department. There, displayed on a floating glass shelf, was the most prized possession, a pristine, handcrafted model of the 1930s Seagrave fire truck, built by his late grandfather. Lily, reaching up to touch a small, intricate detail, accidentally knocked the heavy model. It crashed to the marble floor, shattering into dozens of delicate, irreplaceable pieces of mahogany and brass. Mary rushed in her face, draining of color. "Lily, I told you not to touch anything." She sank to her knees, horrified, stammering apologies to James, who stood frozen at the doorway, his face a mask of shock and immense disappointment. The model was not merely an object. It represented the untainted legacy and trust of his family, a trust he felt had been broken by others, and now, again, by this innocent act. "I will replace it, Captain," Mary whispered, tears welling up. "I promise I will pay it off, however long it takes." But before James could respond, Lily, ignoring her mother's panic, began carefully picking up the pieces. She didn't cry. Instead, she used a small amount of adhesive in the broken parts to create a new, abstract sculpture on the shelf, a chaotic spire of splintered wood and bent brass. She placed a single, small, unbroken wheel on top. "There," she said, looking up at James, her face streaked with dirt but shining with conviction. "It's the rebuilt engine, Mr. Smith. It's not the old truck, but it's new, and it knows what it means to be put back together again." The words hung in the air, echoing the theme Mary had introduced with the bell and the compass. James looked from the chaotic, yet strangely beautiful, sculpture to Lily, and then to Mary, whose own eyes reflected the raw pain of a mother sacrificing everything. In that moment, he realized his fear wasn't about the object. It was about the potential loss of this family. "You are absolutely right," Lily James said, his voice husky, sinking to one knee beside the child. The rebuilt engine, it's better than the original. That evening, James canceled a major business meeting and asked Mary to prepare a simple meal not served, but shared. He led her to the kitchen, away from the formal dining room, over Mary's delicious, home-cooked, slightly spicy chili. The conversation was deeply personal. James finally spoke about the betrayal that had hardened him, the feeling of being used and discarded, and his inability to trust any genuine motive. I felt that if I kept everything pristine and distant, nothing could shatter again. Mary listened patiently, her empathy a physical presence. "Captain," she said gently, "I understand, but you can't live a full life just guarding the wreckage. You need to use the pieces you have left to build something sturdier." That's what Lily and I do every day. The fragile piece was threatened the next morning. The local media had somehow gotten wind of the rumors, and combining the professional gossip with the unusual warmth displayed in his hype, ran a headline, "The Solid Ice Chief Melts. Fire Captain S. Reputation in Flames Over Housekeeper Scandal." The article heavily implied an illicit affair and questioned James's judgment and commitment to his firm and the fire department. James's phone exploded. His board demanded a public statement and Mary's immediate dismissal. Mary, seeing the article, approached him, pale and resolved. "Captain Smith, I must resign. I can't be the reason you lose everything. I do not belong in your world." James stood up, his face determined. The ice was gone, replaced by a profound, righteous heat. "No, Mary, you belong exactly where you are, and I am done letting fear and cynicism dictate my life." He called an immediate, impromptu press conference at his fire station, the brass bell gleaming nearby. He didn't deny the connection, but he redefined it. He spoke not of scandal, but of integrity, human decency, and the lessons of overcoming failure. He publicly announced that, using a substantial portion of his wealth, he was establishing the Rebuilt Engine Program, a charitable initiative partnered with the local fire department to provide resources, childcare, and job security for single parents, particularly those working in essential services. He named Mary Smith as the director of operations, granting her an executive salary, a stable future, and a permanent, necessary role in his life. "Miss Smith taught me that broken things can be rebuilt, often stronger and more beautiful than before," he stated, his eyes finding Mary in the crowd. "This program is not charity. It is an investment in genuine human value, something I had forgotten existed